Project. I'm Dr. Horace Huntley. We're presently at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Today is December 4th, 1996. Okay, Mr. Hicks, I'm appreciative of you taking time out of your schedule to come and sit and talk with me today about your life in Birmingham and the kind of things that you were involved in. Just let me ask you, you were born in Birmingham.
I was born in Birmingham, Jefferson County.
Jefferson County,
Right.
in Westfield.
Alabama.
Okay. Were your parents from this area?
No, my mother was from Selma.
Okay.
She was a school teacher and a principal from Selma. She came to Jemison and taught school in Jemison, and she met my father there.
Okay.
So they decided to get married, and after they got married, she continued to teach for about 3 years, and then after I was born, she decided she wanted to retire. So she worked with kindergartens from that time on until after she passed.
Well, your mother, did she have a college education?
Mother's college education, she went to Alabama State.
Alabama State.
And her teaching career spanned about 4 or 5 years. And when she met my father, she retired.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of education did he have?
Well, my father didn't have an education. He didn't have a high school education. He worked in the steel mill. And one of the things that alternately he used to tell my brother and I, he got out of school to work so his sisters could go to school. All his sisters are school teachers. So that was one of the reasons. I guess he felt gratification for working to send them to school. But you would never know it if you met him. He taught Sunday school at First Baptist Church in Fairfield. And he went to quite a few of the conventions, the Sunday school conventions. And to see him, you would not know that he wasn't an educated person. Because if in teaching his Sunday school and when he was studying his Sunday school, if he didn't understand a word that was, or whatever it was, he'd go by a commentary, a dictionary, and he would ask the children or my mother, different things, and he accomplished quite a bit on his own.
He was a self-educated man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many times, you probably learned more.
Yeah, and I remember once I told him when I was in college, I wanted to go to the steel plant. He told me no. So that was the last place he wanted me to go. But I wanted to go. They had, I was in science in school. I was in natural science. And they had a group that worked in the plant that inspected steel, and they had one man that go along with the crew. And this was the science department. But I told him what I wanted to do, but he still told me no.
Not in the plant.
No.
Yeah, he was not sending you to school to follow in his footsteps because he knew what it was about.
What it was all about that.
Were you raised up in Fairfield?
I was raised in Fairfield. I went to school at Fairfield, and I went to school at Miles College. And when I was 19, I was drafted out of Miles College.
Okay.
And from there, I went in service and stayed in service 2 years and came back and worked around, and then I went in the postal service.
Let me ask you about those days in Fairfield. What was it like growing up in Fairfield?
Well, one of the things that you remember, if you were a kid in Fairfield, you knew the name of every policeman out there, especially the bad ones.
Now, these are white policemen.
These are white policemen. You never had a black policeman in Fairfield when I was a kid. I remember once, I used to, in the afternoons and on the weekends, I would cut grass and cut hedges and different things like that. So I had a job that was too big for me, so my father went with me to cut the hedges. And that was a guy sitting in a wheelchair. This is an old white man. And when we left, my daddy told me, he said he's paying for all the low-downness that he's done in the past. That he's an old policeman. But now the policemen in Fairfield, there was one particular Dean, one Gumby, and there were quite a few people killed in Fairfield. I remember an incident where the policeman beat this guy to death with a hose pipe on a Saturday night. And I understand that the lady across the street, the guy was screaming, so that she came over and asked him to quit beating him. So after we got to beating the man was already dead. They took him to the hospital. Those are the kind of things you always realize, the fact you stayed away from the policeman. And one of the things my father always instilled in us, don't hang on the corners. If you don't have anything to do, if you're not working, you're not in school, come home. So basically, I did not run into that kind of problem, but I often heard about it. And
so the police was not looked upon as being in the community to protect and serve.
The policeman was not looked upon to serve. And one of the things I want to get into as we go further into this, when I got to be an investigator for the civil rights, when I worked civil rights group with the voter registration program, we found a lot of people by policemen had been framed by a certain amount of alcohol. And once we get into the program, I'll explain that to you.
All right. What elementary school did you attend?
At the Robinson Elementary School.
What do you remember about Robinson?
Well, not very much. I remember that there wasn't very much playground. The playground was rough. I remember a few of the teachers, Mrs. Watley and Mrs. Dickerson, I believe it was, Mrs. Wilhite. Mrs. Wilhite was my first grade teacher. Mrs. Dickerson, S.A. Dixon was my second grade teacher. Mrs. Watley was my sixth grade teacher. And I remember the May Day festivities we had. That was a highlight of the school ground. And
tell me about the May Day festivities.
Well, the May Day festivities was like 1st of May. And you would always, our class, we planted the maypole. And
what do you mean, planted?
Well, you had a long pole there, and each person had a ribbon. And the guys were dressed in white, and the girls were dressed in white shorts. And you danced around the pole and with your ribbon until you had the maypole planted. And they had different races. They had relay, short relay, and different little games like that. All day long was dedicated for students. It was just a day to have fun.
Festive occasion.
Right.
Yeah, I remember those May Days. They were. I can see them in my mind's eye right now.
Right.
Planting the maypole.
Planting the maypole and racing and just generally having fun. Baseball or softball. Basically, we played softball on school campus.
Right.
But that day was a day of fun.
That's right. Everybody looked forward to that day.
There you go.
Yeah. What about your high school?
High school was, you remember Professor Oliver, of course. And one thing I do regret, after I came out of service and after things that had happened, I ran into him. He said, I want you to just give me a little summary of what you've done since you left. He said, I've heard some things that you've done. He said, I want to put him in the Hall of Fame at the high school. And every time I would see him, he said, you got it ready? And I was into so many things at the time. I said, no, I haven't gotten it ready. He said, would you be sure and get it ready? But after he died, I went to his funeral. And I was kind of sorry that I didn't. Yeah. Because he was pretty much interested in it. That's right. He was, Professor Oliver was, if you did wrong, if you were in the class, in the hallways, I mean, there wasn't this thing about child brutality. He carried his strap in his pocket. And if he caught you wrong in the hall, he didn't wait to get you to the office. You get a few licks there in the hall. But school was a different, high school was a different situation for me because I had been accustomed to just sitting in one class, and when I got to high school, you passed classes. Then I got interested in football. So one of the other teachers at the time was an upholstery instructor. And I got interested in upholstery, and Mr. Hilliard, I believe his name was, taught the upholstery class. And I became quite interested in high school. I majored in woodwork. I did all of the painting and refinishing, rebuilding furniture. And at that time, I wanted to go to school in Virginia to take upholstery. I can't think of the name of it now.
Where in Virginia?
It slips my mind right now, but it stuck with me quite often. He always told me, he wanted me to go there. But money at that time was not a thing of, too plentiful. Right. And so I started throwing papers. And in the afternoons, we called it at that time stuffing the papers. You would take the social section and the funny paper, and put that together, and then Saturday night you would put that in the headline. So I did that, and that's how I went to college. And so high school was a pretty interesting thing, and at the time, you know, everybody was glad to get out.
Right. What extracurricular activities did you participate in?
Football. Football was and baseball. And
What positions?
I played linebacker and center.
Linebacker and center.
At that time, it wasn't called linebacker, it was called defensive back.
Okay.
And center, for softball, I always liked to play center field. But I went to Korea. We sometimes would get together, you know, and have softball games in the afternoon. I got lucky enough to play second base. But that was an experience. But high school was quite interesting, and it was, you knew you were going to school. There was no thought of dropping out. And not at my house.
Right.
You had to go to school. So
That was your job.
that was, you would go to school. And you enjoyed going.
You were in school with a rather noted individual, Willie Mays.
True.
Tell me more about that.
Well, Willie Mays was the person that you always knew that was around the ball somewhere. I met Willie Mays before he came to high school, because he would always, you probably heard him playing stickball with the kids in New York. He would always play stickball in the street with the kids. And they had a park in Fairfield. Now, I think the Williams Homes are on the park there in Fairfield. If I'm right, the home for elderly people.
Right.
That was a park at that time. So in the afternoons, we'd go to Boy Scout meeting, and we'd stay on the park and play. And this is where I met Willie Mays, and playing football. And our football was a milk can. We didn't have a real football. We had a pet milk can, and that's what we played with. And on Thanksgiving, we'd get a real football and play. So eventually, all of us, it was a thing when you got to high school, you played football. So there were quite a few of the guys, some of them, Coach Brown was there at the time. He was in service, and he came back to school at the time we were in school.
What Brown was this?
Over at Parker High School.
Major Brown?
Right. Not Major Brown, the one that's a basketball coach at Parker now, Cap Brown.
Oh, Cap Brown, okay.
Yeah. Now, he came from service and came back, and he played football there a year before I graduated.
Right.
And he graduated a couple of years ahead of me.
Oh, okay. So I didn't know that Cap went to Fairfield.
Yeah, he's originally from Fairfield.
Okay.
And he left there and went to Tuskegee. And from there, you know, where his present job is now.
Right. And was Mays a star at?
Mays was a star at anything he did. Basketball, baseball, football. He was we had a quarterback, but Mays was so good at passing. Mays was passing out of fullback slot. And we had several guys. We had one guy that we didn't call them wide receivers, they were ends at that time. Lonnie Rimbert from Fairfield. And that was his main target, Lonnie Rimbert. He was about 6'6", and he'd just throw it out there and he'd catch it, and he could throw it 100 yards. That's right. So he was a star with any kind of ball that he played. And my senior year, he was drafted up to the majors, and he always played with I think his team in Fairfield was the Gray Sox, Fairfield Gray Sox.
Was this a company team?
This was a community team. He played with the community team, and of course, you know, his father was playing with the company team, with the TCI team. And then eventually he played with the TCI team. And from there, he went on to, you know, his other different teams and went on up to the majors. But my father worked in a plant together. And because I didn't know his father, and so when I was a kid, my father told me that he was a baseball player. And then later I met Willie.
What did you do after high school?
After high school, I went to Miles College. And I was going to major in natural science. At that time, I wanted to go into medicine. I stayed there until I was a junior, and I was drafted in September of 19, I believe it was 51 or 52. I was drafted in the service, and I went from there to Fort Bliss, stayed there in basic training for 16 weeks, and then to Korea. And I went to Korea and stayed there 14 months. came back to Birmingham, and I worked around it. I had a job before I left, a job I had when I was in college. I worked, but I started taking civil service exams while I was in service. And I wrote the Birmingham post office and asked them if I could take the test while I was still in service, and they told me it wouldn't be a good idea because I might be in service when they called me to do it. But I only had about 3 months left to go in service at that time. So I went, I came out and worked a year, and I had taken the postal test and passed it. And I think my score was about 95, and my veteran preference ran it over 100 because they had 10-point veteran preference for being a disabled veteran.
Let me ask you before we get into that part. When you left high school, you went to Miles, right? What was that transition like? Now, your high school is in Fairfield and your college is in Fairfield as well.
Well, you're still at home, you know. You're still at home, and the thing that when I got to college, in school, in high school, you basically had somebody to look over your shoulder and tell you, you know, when you're going wrong or what's taking place. But when I got to college, basically you were on your own. And I found it a little bit hard to take because some of the teachers at the time had the attitude, I got mine, you get yours. But you learn that you would have to, you know, you were on your own, you actually had more responsibility, right?
Did you live at home? Or?
I lived at home.
And what kind of relationships did you develop while you were at Miles with students as well as with teachers? Were they lasting relationships?
Some of them were, one was very lasting. I met my wife before I went to Miles, and she came to Miles, and I left her when I went in service there, and we got married after I came back from service.
Was she from Fairfield?
She was from Ensley. And one of the teachers there in the science department, we became very good friends, but since that time he's passed. And I met quite a few people there. My best man was from, went from Miles, but he lived in Powderly. As a matter of fact, he handled my wedding. He and my wife made the preparations for my wedding while I was gone. And because when I came back, I got married 2 weeks after I got out of service. And his name was Roy Casey. And I met quite a few people. I met the Reverend Peter Wren there. And I met B.T. King, all of the old football players.
Right.
They had been in service and had come back to school. And I met quite a few people, and they're still friends now. And I met a lot of them after I started working at the Postal Service. And I also met some people at the Postal Service that taught me at Miles. Some of them, some that taught me in Fairfield, and I became their boss at Miles, at the Postal Service. So it was kind of a, interesting situation.
Right. Did you have brothers and sisters?
I had one brother. He's deceased now. He passed in June of, I believe, 2 years ago. And I have a sister in Fairfield. She's a daycare instructor at First Baptist Fairfield. And I have one other sister, Thelma Edwards, in Fairfield. And that was it. I had one sister. She was deceased very early.
Were you the baby?
No. I was the brother that passed was the baby. The sister that's working in Fairfield is the baby. And I was the second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, I was the second. I was the oldest boy, and I was kind of like, when Daddy left, I was kind of like Dad.
All right.
So all the responsibility, whatever happened, when we came home, Dad and I had to talk. Yeah.
Well, what was it like being at Miles for 2 years and then being drafted into the military?
Well, it was a whole different world. As a matter of fact, about some of my fellow friends at Miles were drafted with me. And it was a whole new world because we had been accustomed to going home at night. You've been accustomed to when you went to school, you did your job, and you got your lesson at night. It was a whole different world to me because I had never been that far away from home before.
Where were you?
I went to Fort Bliss, Texas. And to me, that was the other side of the world. At first, I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for 2 weeks. And we left there on the troop train for 5 days, and we went to Fort Jackson, to Fort Bliss, Texas. And that got to be an experience. We trained in White Sands, New Mexico. And it was quite an experience because I didn't know too much about it at that particular time, but later I found out that it was part of the proving grounds for the atomic bomb and other experiments that they had out there. And it was quite an experience because you're up all night, and when you're going through your basic, you got to do that 25-mile march with 60 pounds on your back. And we did that at night. Did it one afternoon, it started snowing. Out there in the desert, you get temperatures like 102 a day and night, it might be down to 0. So we spent the night in the desert that night. First night to stay out all night. I had stayed out as a scout, but not like this. We got up the next morning, they had brought food out to us, the jelly was frozen, the milk was frozen. New experience, you know, whole new experience. Now I had been used to hunting a lot with my father. We go rabbit hunting. When we got out there, we saw a lot of jackrabbits, and we saw a lot of other rabbits, and we started chasing the rabbits, so we kind of got in trouble about that. The officers told us, say, we kept chasing these rabbits, say, we're gonna put you in jail. So we had to leave the rabbits alone, but we figured if we get us a rabbit, we wouldn't have to eat sea rats, we'd have fried rabbits.
Was this a segregated or an integrated?
It was integrated when I went in service. Mm-hmm. It was integrated. As a matter of fact, from the first day I went into service, and all overseas until I came back to Fort Smith, Arkansas, I never heard the N-word. Mm-hmm. And Arkansas was very segregated. I stayed there 2 days and was shipped home for 30-day vacation. And then I went back to Killeen, Texas for 90 days. Then I was discharged. But the only segregation I encountered in service was at Fort Smith, Arkansas.
It's after you had
been overseas. Right.
Yeah, you went to Korea.
Right.
Did you see any action?
I saw 14 months.
Okay. What was your job?
I was in an AW platoon. When I first went over,
What's AW?
It's automatic weapons platoon. Consists of anti-aircraft guns, 50 caliber anti-aircraft guns, 40 millimeter guns. And at that time, they had just phased rockets in. You didn't have rockets as such as you have now. You had to fire the rockets, and it was called, and a lot of people, it was named the suicide unit. Because when you fired the automatic weapons, you had 5 minutes to move. You couldn't stay because gunfire was concentrated on those automatic weapons. I got to Korea, and we were supposedly trained to protect airfields. But when we got to Korea, we were put on the front line. And the units that we were operating, they weren't sitting on the line as such, they were sitting about 100 yards out in front of the line. And the reason for that, if any resistance was caused, you were supposed to hold until the line got back to safety. And there was no way you could get the equipment out. You had to detonate it and blow it up.
So is that right?
Yeah. So, and this is where I was wounded twice. And I was in a tank unit. And I went over a landmine and blew the track off the tank, and it damaged my back. And then one morning, just before day, it was raining, and we were firing ammunition, and my fingers got trapped within it. Oh. So it was, and then...
so you were in the tank?
I was in the tank when the track was blown off.
Were you driving the tank?
No, I was commander. I was the platoon commander at that time. Okay. I had been a tank driver. Excuse me. But at this particular time, when the track was blown off, I was tank commander at that time. And tank commander consists of 5 different tanks, and you commanding those 5 tanks. Of course, you have a platoon leader. I was platoon sergeant, and platoon leader never would go, out in the field. So this is what happened. The reason I got wounded.
And when you were wounded, were you taken out of the field at that time?
I was taken out of the field for one night. At the time that my hand was hurt, I was taken out for an hour and sent back. And the time that I was wounded inside of the tank when the track was blown off, I was sent back to the hospital ship for one night. The hospital ship was stationed back in Incheon Bay in Korea, and I was sent back to the line.
Were there whites in your platoon
Yes.
that you were, what was your?
Platoon
Platoon
sergeant.
sergeant?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, my platoon sergeant, when I first went into Korea, was white. And there were two other white guys in there. There were, the platoon consisted of 5 people. The squad consisted of 5 people. And the platoon consisted of 5 tanks and 5 head trucks with 50 caliber machine guns mounted on them. So it was pretty well integrated by the time that I got to Korea.
All right. So then after you leave Korea, then you go to Arkansas.
I went to Arkansas. I came back to California, and they have what they call a pipeline. They send you down one line, and you go right back down that same line when you get out. But when I came back from Korea, ship docked in San Francisco, I left from Seattle, Washington, and we were processed in California, sent to Arkansas, and we were sent from Arkansas. That's where we were dispersed to, take your leave.
Right.
And I was sent back to Killeen, Texas. And I stayed there in an armored outfit for 90 days, and then I was discharged.
Did you make a determination that you were not going to go back to Miles once you got out?
Yes, I made that determination when I was in service. I decided that I wanted, after dealing with tanks and heavy equipment, I decided I wanted to deal with heavy equipment. And I knew in the Postal Service that they had 18 wheels and different large-sized trucks to work there, and I got interested in working with that, and that was where I took the test to go to. And this is how I got involved in the Postal Service in that class.
Did you do that as soon as you got out of the military?
1 year after that.
1 year after. So what did you do in that intervening year?
1 year after that, I worked different jobs, odd jobs. I worked for TCI for a while. And
Did you work in that plant?
I didn't go in the plant. No, that was a no.
So they still ain't together.
No, that was a no.
Yeah.
I worked for a year. It was just about a year to the point, and I had taken the test already. And I would make daily trips down to personnel and see if they had any jobs open. And the guy would always tell me no. So finally one day he told me, he says, at the time, vehicle operation was the unit I was trying to get in. It was on the, where the Birmingham School of Fine Arts is now.
Right.
It was on that
site. Building.
Right, the building was on that site. All of the vehicles were stationed there. And so you had to walk from the post office 2 blocks up to 8th Avenue to where this unit was. So at that time, the superintendent of that unit was Mr. E.F. Palmer. He later became the postmaster. So the chief personnel, which was named Mr. Wolf, sent me up and told him to go up and told me he thought he had a couple of jobs open. So I went up to see him, and he told me he didn't have any jobs open. So I went back to see Mr. Wolf. He said, you go back and tell him I said to consider you for one of those jobs that's open. Say, I know he's got 2 open because I have the papers for him on my desk. So I went back, and he told me he didn't know whether he had any jobs open or not. He told me to get back in touch with him. And I did. And he told me to come, to get in touch with him by September, I believe it was the 15th.
What time was the year was this?
This was in the summer,
Okay.
about June or July. And I was at work at the time. My wife called me, she said the post office called me. So of course I was elated. And I told my boss, well, I really wasn't, at the time I decided to work 2 weeks. And there were 3 of us working. I was the only black in the unit there. And I didn't apply, but considered, I asked to be considered for manager of the group that I was working in. And I was all but told, no blacks apply to get these kind of jobs.
But you had 2 years of college.
Yes.
At the time.
3 years.
3 years.
And so the guy that was working there, that had come there later than I did, told the guy he was going to the mines, he had got a job in the mine. Told our boss this. So he patted him on the back and he said, well, I'm glad for you. So I said, well, since he's patting people on the back, I'll tell him I'm going to the post office. So I told him, I said, well, I'm leaving too. He said, where you going? I said, I'm going to the post office. He said, well, what am I going to do now? I said, frankly, I don't know. But some of the people in the store there, they were quite glad for me. They knew that I had advanced training. They knew I had been to college, and they were very glad.
You say in the store?
Yeah, this was, I worked, I worked for TCI, had a commissary.
Okay.
And I worked in that unit for a while when I came back out of service.
Yeah.
And
was your father still working for TCI?
I still work for TCI. As a matter of fact, my father worked for TCI 40 years. And he was 64 years old when he died, and he never enjoyed a day of retirement. The day he had 40 years, he died. So that's right. And I used to see some of the clothes he had to wear in the plant that was around all this iron. He would have to reinforce rubber gloves and rubber boots, and pants were insulated, with all of this insulation and stuff. And he just said no, he didn't want any of his sons in there. So fortunately, it was just two of us, my brother and I, neither one of us did. My brother worked for Chrysler in Detroit. And so he didn't go in, so I stayed here.
Hopefully we escaped the
steel
rigors of the mills.
Right.
Yeah. So your first job then in the post office was what?
Was a vehicle operator. Okay, this consisted of, we worked, they were 5-ton capacity trucks and 18-wheelers. What we were doing, we were collecting mail from all of the railroads and bus stations and all of the outlying areas in the city of Birmingham and surrounding areas like Ansley, Fairfield, Homewood. We made the dispatches to those stations for the deliveries for the carriers to make the deliveries to, the street carriers to get their mail to get the delivery done. We transported everything that came in by rail, everything that came to the Federal Reserve, we transported. At that particular time, it was, I think one of the reasons that the job was covered so by the other people, it consisted of you wearing firearms. And I remember one afternoon when I first went into the unit, there was one black guy that temporary. I was the first one went in that took a test and came off the register. So at that day, they made him regular, not regular, but they made him certified. You're certified after you pass the test and you're put on the register and you're pulled from the register. So we went to Greyhound bus station, it was segregated. We went to Greyhound bus station eating breakfast, and this policeman that patrolled there, he walked up behind us. And at a particular time, we weren't in uniform, or we had on firearms. I had on a jacket that had U.S. mail on it. And he said, where you boys work? So we didn't turn around. So he said again, where you boys work? So I laughed. I turned around and said, where you boys work? And he saw U.S. mail. He said, oh, it's kind of unusual to see black boys with guns on. So we made a joke out of it. And eventually, the unit started getting more and more blacks in it. But it was more or less a coveted outfit that
what year was this? This
was in 1955. Right. And I stayed as a driver from 1955 to 1963. And between that time, I had applied for promotion. But the first time I applied for promotion, I was still not regular, I was still a sub. But the amazing thing, I was told that you can't apply for this job, you're a sub. But here they hired a white boy from a loan company. And he worked 2 weeks, and they hired him and gave him a certified job and gave him a regular job. And he was a sub. And I asked what was the difference. I didn't get an answer. And I applied for this job again in 1963. As a matter of fact, it was in 1962 when I applied for the job. The job came open in 1962. It wasn't immediately filled. And I would inquire and ask what happened. I never got an answer. But I was told the job was being held open until the last minute for another white guy. But after the resumes were reviewed, they made a change of it.
Oh.
And I was called to the postmaster's office at the main office. I believe it was about the 15th of February. My coworkers were 90% white. Two of them quit work at the time and stood around the postmaster's office until I came out. And one of the questions that the postmaster asked me, this was Mr. Palmer, that was my supervisor when I first came in, the one that refused me the job. One of his questions, he looked at me and gritted his teeth. He said, "What would you do if somebody called you a nigger?" I said, "Well, there are proper channels to go through for that." And I said, I would first remind him of what he had said and go through the procedures and give him a letter, which is required, and go to the proper channels. He looked at me and said, "Are you telling me what I want to hear, or is that what you would do?" I said, "That's what I would do." Because he knew of me quite a few. I had quite a temper. And one of the things that happened at that time, when you went in service, you had 90 days, you could be fired for anything. They didn't have to have a reason for firing. All the people that had been there before that had been fired, they didn't stay.
In service, you mean?
Right.
Service at post office.
Right, in that department.
Yeah. Right.
And so the rumor got out that I was going to be fired. And the same guy that stood around the office the day I got the job, postmaster told, the superintendent told me, he said, there are a lot of rumors that go around here. He said, now when you want to know the fact, you come to me. So he called me in one day. He says, "I understand you're not friendly with the guys. So you don't laugh and joke with them." And I listened to him. And when he finished, I asked him, I said, "What was I hired for? Was I hired to play, laugh, and joke, or was I hired to do a job?" He said, "You were hired to do a job." I said, "You remember you told me that the rumors that go around?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "That was one of those rumors." And then he patted me on the back and wanted to offer me a Coke. I told him, "Sorry, I don't drink Cokes." He knew that I had a very bad temper, and I did. And my father knew it also, because after I got the job, he had a long conference with me. But leading up to that, I'm kind of getting ahead of it a little bit, but leading up to that, the day I was appointed, every white person in that department quit and went down to City Hall and had a meeting. They got all the black people that were in the department to cover their runs. They came back. As a matter of fact, I was a steward in the union by this time. My same union that I was a steward of wrote me a letter, and I should have brought it. I got to have a resume that thick that came from them, and told me that although they felt like I was qualified for the job, this white man they felt was better for the job.
This is your union.
Yeah. So
What union is this?
this is post office.
Postal workers.
Yeah. They even got petitions to get some black, I won't even call names. They got some black people to sign the petition. Later, the guys came to me and told me they didn't know what they were signing. I told them, "Don't worry about it. I'm fighting my own battles." And ironically, each one of those people that signed that petition, just about every one of them died with a heart attack. I'm not saying what caused it, but each day, each week, you could tell the letters when they came. At that time, all our mail came from Atlanta. And they were protesting and they were writing letters, and the letters came back, each one. And when the final letter came, you could see the guys dropping their heads. But I'm still the only person that, out of a unit of about 30 people, except the older guys there, I'm still the only one that came off the register. All the rest of these people had been hired off the street. But now, at that particular time, it wasn't the fact of that. It was the fact that I was black. And from the time went on, it was rough. I had threats from the Klan. I had threats at my home, and they would call my wife and tell me, we don't get that so-and-so, whatever. And at that time we were doing guard duty in the neighborhood.
What neighborhood did you live
in Titusville. Because you had all the bombings over at 60 over on north side. So at that particular time, I don't know if you remember, but every neighborhood we sit up all night. And while I was out there, assuming they knew where I was, while we were out guarding the streets, they would call the house and they would harass my wife. And they would tell, but now, the amazing thing, I reported it to the inspector of the post office and they quit. I had no more problems.
Is that right? So you assume that it was some of the people.
As a matter of fact, I know it was some of the people.
Now, are you still the only black person in the department at that time?
I'm still the only black person. Now, at that particular time, they had gotten other black drivers. I was the only black supervisor. I was the first black supervisor in the Birmingham post office, period. There were no others. About 2 years later, they had clerks out on the railroad that they would let act as supervisors. But when they got in the city, they could not act.
So when you were hired as a supervisor, that's when everybody quit?
They didn't quit the jobs, they quit the work. And they went down to the courthouse and they had a meeting on me about the job.
They couldn't do anything about it.
They couldn't do anything.
Your orders were coming in from Atlanta.
My orders came from Washington.
From DC.
Right. One of the guys that was in charge of the clerks union was Tom Jenkins. I don't know if you know him. Thomas Jenkins. Thomas was working with me and was working with Washington. And at the particular time, maybe I shouldn't go into the details in this, but Tom was on the telephone. People in Washington was talking to the postmaster, and Tom told me, he came and told me, he said, you ain't got no problem, so you don't have to worry. He said, you qualified, you passed all the tests, and he said, instructions have been given, not from Birmingham, not from Atlanta, so it's been given from Washington that you are the person to have the job. He said,
Tom Jenkins, black and white.
Tom Jenkins is black. He later left Birmingham. And
what was his position?
He was a clerk here, but he was president of the union here, of the clerks union. But Tom eventually got into politics and he went to Washington and he went to the housing authority. And he was from Fairfield. And whenever I see his mother, she said, you Fairfield boys stick together now. I said, we're going to. But anyway, that is why my orders came from Washington. They didn't come from Birmingham.
And you started in the post office around
1955, September.
In 1956, well, 55 was when the Montgomery bus boycott took place, and in 56, the start of the development of the Alabama Christian movement for human rights. Did you ever participate in any of that activity?
You couldn't. No government employee could at all. Because if you did, your job was liable. But I felt I could work other ways. And this is where I felt like it was best that I worked through this area. And I felt because working that way, I felt like I could do black man more good inside the service than I would outside, especially those that were inside. Because so many injustices were given to black men in the postal service. And it's still being done. There are a lot of situations that happen. A person, people do take advantage of sickness. There are people that are legitimately sick. One of those situations is very bad. If a person has sickness in his family, I can't deny him letting him go see about his family. But that was one of the problems that we ran into when I first came into service. We were put, the post office was integrated, but it was segregated. Your fountains were segregated. They didn't have signs on them. Your bathrooms were segregated. They didn't have signs on them.
Just by custom.
By custom. And by the older employees working there. And a lot of the problems came from black people. Because I asked them one, I said, what's wrong with the water in this fountain over here? We don't drink that water. I said, why? You just trying to be smart. We don't drink it. So I drank the water. Nobody said anything but the black people. Even the older blacks. So we had
to telling you not to
drink out of the fountain.
This is the white fountain.
Yeah. We had a problem in the main post office. They had one side, the black people went, the other side, the white people went. So I went into that and I asked what was the problem. And so eventually we just started going on the side where the white people went. After I became supervisor, I had a very bad problem out at the airfield. You had the good old boys out there.
At the airport?
Right. You have the post office out there. The black guys go out there, they were told to go to the bathroom in the terminal. So I had a driver to go in there one morning. The guy threw a bag and hit him on the leg. You got these buckles on the bag, on the bags. And nobody disciplined him about it. So I came on duty, and the guy came to me and brought my letter and told me this guy hit him with this bag. So I went out there, and the guy wasn't there, and I talked to a supervisor, he didn't want to talk to me. I said, either you can talk to me, or we can take it to the postmaster. So he told me he would talk to the guy. And eventually the guy, and this guy was a staunch segregationist, and as a matter of fact, I hesitate to say Klan was pretty rampant, but it wasn't known.
Within the post office?
Yeah, with people that were working in there, because this meeting was very Klanish. As a matter of fact, this is how the Klan got involved with calling my house after I was promoted. But
how could you be sure that this was?
You could tell by the actions. You could tell by the things that were going on. It's a thing that you know when you're there.
Give me an example of some of those things that were going on that would tell you that this is Klan activity.
Listening to conversation by different people, and you had people that from the other race that would come back and tell you things that were going on. The reason that I said it was Klan activity, because how would the Klan know my address? And how would the Klan know my activities at the Postal Service? And all of this happened after I became supervisor. Now, I'm sure that it became known out in the community, but it also came known from the Postal Service. And some of the people that came out of the Klan area, East Lake, Center Point, in those areas. I went out to East Lake one Saturday afternoon to close the East Lake post office. And when we say close the post office, that means you pick up day's receipts and pick up mail that's come in and bring it back in. And I had to stop for a Klan parade. Little children, grown people, women. The parade came through Birmingham and went to 5 Point West. They had Klan headquarters out there, and they had this citizen council that Asia Carter was the head of.
The White Citizens Council.
Right. And that afternoon they had a big rally out there. And I had to pull the truck over to the side of the road, and all I could hear was nigger, nigger, nigger.
Approximately what year is this?
1956, 56, 57. In that neighborhood.
Right.
You could see the people, and conversation went on, and when you would talk to people, you could tell from the conversation and tell from the things that happened what was going on. And I'm skipping around a little bit. We're talking about the Klan. When I was investigator for the Voter Rights Act, I was in charge of the office at the Baptist College. And I had a Klansman to come in to register to vote. And I asked him if he was belonged to any subversive organizations. He said he belonged to the Klan. I said, I can't register. He said, well, the Klan do good things. He said, the Klan, people get burnt out and we put groceries at the door. I said, I still can't register. I said, your mother a Klan? She said, no, I registered her. 30 minutes later, I was sitting there, and a guy came in with a pair of fatigues on, a t-shirt, and he drove up in an old Volkswagen bus. And he had on combat boots, and he walked by, he said, everything all right? I said, far as I know. He said, is it quiet? I said, yeah, it's been quiet. So he turned around and looked back over his shoulder. He said, "You had a bomb threat." I said, "Who are you?" And going out the door, he said, "FBI." But I never knew of the bomb threat. So apparently it was called somewhere else. Now I worked with the, as a voter inspector.
This is after the post office or while you
I
were
was
in the
still in
post
the
office?
Postal Service. I was, if you remember 1965, when the act was passed, they had a massive drive here to get people qualified to vote that had been turned down. Okay, it was our job to go in and search and find the people that had been turned down and get them qualified.
How did you get that position?
They asked, when they came to Birmingham, they asked for volunteers to work, and this was from the supervisors, volunteers from the supervisor department to volunteer to work with this group. And we were deputized. Only 4 of us were deputized.
How many black, how many white?
4, just 4
4
blacks.
blacks. Okay.
And we had some whites from other states.
Okay.
We had some guys from Tuskegee. We had 1 from Atlanta. We had 1 from Jackson, Mississippi. Black.
Okay.
It's amazing some of the things that you went into and that you found out. I mentioned a minute ago about policemen planting half pints of whiskey and busting a guy, and that supposedly is a felony. And I registered a guy we had been given instructions what you could and what you could not register a person for. I registered a lot of people that had been busted for half pints. The Birmingham News was there. And they wanted to know why did I register. I registered a man that committed murder. They wanted to know why. Well, I didn't feel it was my place to tell them because I figured they should know. But now, you can legally have 5 gallons of untaxed whiskey in your home for your personal use. But they were busting them for a half pint. The man that I registered for committing murder was pardoned by John Patterson. So now they didn't go into details to find out why. They were on 11 o'clock news that night. My picture was on 11 o'clock news that night, so I registered people that weren't qualified. You might remember the big mess they had at the night, the first election after the people that we registered to vote. People that came to the city were not trying to put them in the precincts. They were just putting everybody at the fire station out in Smithfield and everybody at Washington School. So the 4 of us from Birmingham said, you all are making jobs for somebody else. There's no way that these people can go and vote at this place. Well, we don't have time. I said, oh yeah, we got time. And we started breaking it down and putting them in the precincts where they belong. One of the attorneys came from Washington, and I worked with him because I knew the city better than anybody else. And I worked with him for the whole time that he was in Birmingham. And we would have to go as far as just to look back up one person if he was on that list. And if he had been, had any reason for being turned down as a voter, we could go and find out his reason why and investigate it and determine whether or not it was a good cause or a bad cause. Sometimes we had to get some answers on it. To go back when I came from service, I wasn't old enough to vote when I went in service. When I came out, my wife and I decided that we were going to go down to the courthouse. I should have brought the paper. We went in, and we were given a long list of questions to answer. My wife was teaching school, and I was working at the Postal Service, and I had been to Korea.
Where did she teach?
She taught first taught out at Leeds High School, and then she finished in Jackson Hole. So I told the guys, I am not answering these questions. He said, well, you can't pass it. My wife said, go on, fill them. I said, no, I'm not going to fill it out. I said, mister, I have fought war for this country. I have been wounded, and I think when this card comes, I should be a voter. If it don't, I'm going to cause a lot of problems. I did not take the test, but I passed as a voter. He sent me the card the next week, and but they wouldn't put me in the same precinct with my wife. They put her at Washington School. They sent me to Glen Iris. Didn't matter as long as I was voting. But this is a lot of stuff that came up And you had whites as well as blacks, but the biggest of them were blacks. And right here on Fifth Avenue, it's where the biggest of it happened. And after we had people in line at 11 o'clock at night. And one thing, SCLC had some workers there from Mississippi. They were going to close the line. Those people got on the telephone and called Washington, and they were told to keep that line open as long as they had people there. We worked as late as 11 and 12 o'clock at night to get those people registered. Right.
So how long did you do that?
I did that from 1955, November 1955 until December 1968.
65 to 68.
Right. I mean, 65 to 68.
Right.
And the reason I came back to the Postal Service, they wanted us to go permanent. But my father had just passed. My mother was here, and I was starting another business here. And it was better that I came back to the service. I still had my job here. As a matter of fact, the post office was still paying me, and the Justice Department was paying my overtime. So I came back, and the rest of the guys decided that they didn't want to go either. So we all came back at that time and started back to work here.
So that period in your life from 65 to 68, you then were basically doing movement kinds of
All over the country. I was in Jackson, Mississippi. Most of the work was done right here. I worked here at the main office, which is a federal building. I worked there, and I moved from there, and I opened an office at the Baptist College, and I opened an office out at Saraton in the post office out there. And after we would get it set up and get people to handle it, we would move on and open up other offices. I opened an office up in Bessemer, and that's where I finished in Bessemer, the Bessemer Post Office. I had an office, excuse me, in the Bessemer Post Office there. And a friend of mine, Edwin Brunt, he was one of the people that was with us. He was at the Powderly office at the Baptist College. I left, and he left him at the office, and I worked at Bessemer. And there were four of us at that time. One of them was Joe English. He's now living in Mobile. The other one was Edwin Brunt and Oliver Wills. And the four of us were the four that were working with this group. It's a huge group, quite a few people that were working, but I don't really think, I think some of them, now the guys from Tuskegee, they had everything at heart. All of the black guys had everything at heart, but the white ones that came, I think it was a way to do an extra job, to get away. And because the reason I say this, the thing wasn't done right.
The commitment was not there.
The commitment wasn't there. Because this is why I think George Wallace was running for office at that next election. You had so many people out at Washington School, they couldn't close at 7 o'clock. People were out there as late as 9 and 10 o'clock trying to vote. So eventually they had to break it down and put them in the precincts as we were doing to begin with, which could easily have been done when we registered people to vote. All you had to do was ask for the area they live in. But we tried to explain this to them, and they just weren't interested in doing it. I don't think it was, as you say, I don't think they had the whole thing at heart anyway. But there were four of us, and the guys that came here from Tuskegee, we all got together and worked out the precincts and tried to divert the people into the right precincts, which, if we hadn't, probably would have been a lot worse than it was at voting time.
What do you remember about the Freedom Rides?
The Freedom Rides, I remember the incident that happened at Anniston. I remember the incident that happened at Trailway Bus Station. Now, my job entailed, when I was supervisor at the post office, entailed of I had a crew of 30-some people. It entails surveillance of every area that we had mail to come in. And that was at the airport in Birmingham, the bus stations, the railways. This was the backbone of the mail. At that time, trucks hadn't gotten real popular. I had to do surveillance on them. And the day that bus came in and they had the problem at Trailway, I was there. It was quite an experience that, and the amazing part about this is that, and I can understand why, and I often tell people there are certain books that I don't think I should read because it makes me angry. And I read the book a long time coming. And a lot of the stuff and a lot of the people that's involved in that book, I came in contact with them. Colonel Al Lingo, I came in contact with him right on Fifth Avenue here, right above Gaston Motel. The Sunday night after the bombing, they had streets blocked off.
This is after the 16th Street.
The Sunday night after.
Right.
They had the streets blocked off. Well, that was the main artery. We had 30 big 5-ton trucks going through that were going to every area in the city carrying mail. So I went down that evening, that night, it was at 12 o'clock at night, and he and all of his friends were standing there talking, you know. So I drove up, I was in a postal vehicle. I drove up and made myself known and let them know who I was. Nobody turned around. So I told him, I said, now I got something to tell you. I said, it's gonna be 30 or 40 trucks come through here in about the next 30 minutes. I said, they're gonna have to go through. I said, I'm looking for you to see to them getting through without any problems. So he eventually turned around, he told me, well, I ain't gonna be responsible for him. I said, if mail is delayed, if you know the law, which I know you do, delaying mail is a felony. I didn't have any problems with that. Trucks went through. I personally took them through, every one of them. With that lineup, I wouldn't let either one leave the post office until they all got ready to go, and then we left. We had no more problems. The road was open eventually later on up in the day. The job also entailed about 600 other vehicles in the southeastern area. And what it entails is you kept records on those vehicles. And each month, at the end of the month, you had to do a report on it. Now, up until I had the job, there were 2 people doing the job. When I got the job, there was 1 person doing it. I had to come to work at night at 12 o'clock, and I worked all night until the next morning to get it done. This had to be done, so it had to go in another report. Now, this entailed getting the mileage off of vehicles. If the vehicles had too much mileage on them, moving them to another area that would compensate the miles that they were not getting. And I had no help on this. But I didn't complain. I just took my time and did it. But fortunately, I got a supervisor that came in after Mr. Palmer became postmaster. His name was Wolf. He came from personnel department. Now, he worked with me very good. Here's the problem that I often ran into, and I'll tell you about my other supervisor that I got. Mr. Wolf didn't know anything about the department. He knew I knew the department. He would come to me, he said, you run the outfit. If you have any problems, let me know. The other supervisor I got, he was appointed by E.F. Palmer. Had a 2nd grade education. He was a mechanic. Okay? He eventually became my supervisor. And we used to stay into it all the time. And one day I told him, I said, I tell you what, I put in for a job under his administration. The job was vehicle operation analyst. The job title was changed. The job was given to one of his friends, the guy that was his clerk. I filed civil service action against him. Civil service came in, told him, so you know the man is qualified, why don't you give him the job? They were doing it. I won the case. The first time that they sent an investigator to Birmingham, the investigator was called back and told to interview me again, and they turned it down. Now, when you have an action by the affirmative action groups that you have, most people think, I don't know what they think, but most of the investigators that come to investigate you the first time are black. The people behind them, their supervisors are white. Your personnel manager makes a decision of what's right or what's wrong. He makes a decision. So they sent a group from Atlanta to interview everybody. They wanted to know, what did you think about the affirmative action group? I told them I didn't think anything about it. I said, why should I come to you complaining when you giving me the job? And why should I come to you complaining when you don't make a decision on it? Some black guy asked. I said, why don't you have this thing integrated? Why at the first level they all blacks? Well, we didn't talk anymore. But these are the things, and I often told the guys that came that were promoted after me, and I would tell them, I said, let me tell you something. You're gonna have to stand up. You're gonna have to be a man, but be right. Because you can't go half right. You're gonna have to know what you're doing. You're gonna have to make a decision, and you can't fool around with it. You're gonna have to make it. Well, we can't do like you. But I was the oldest supervisor in the Birmingham post office, but I was the youngest. I became supervisor at early 30s. And everybody else behind me was older, but I was the oldest in grade. But I would tell all of the black supervisors, I said, you gotta help your people. Well, they won't do right. I said, that's why. You can't just totally line up that. And here's one thing I often say. If I can't help myself, who else is gonna help me? Now, if you get, the other side has been getting help down through the years. You gotta help each other. And I'm afraid to say some of our black young supervisors do not want to do this. They're only interested in that next grade. So that's the next grade, and they don't care who they are to get that. And I've experienced this quite a bit. And but it's just like as the old proverbial thing. It's like a barrel of crabs. As soon as you get to the top, I'm gonna pull you back. So you gotta have help. And you got to know what you're doing, and you got to be able to produce. But I don't know what's going on up there now. The thing up there now is everybody's new. There's a whole lot of problems. I don't even confess. I was called to testify for a guy that felt like he had been discriminated against. He was black. And I told him when he was working, I said, I had a long talk with him. He was very, very belligerent. He worked at the police department. He transferred to the postal service. And I talked to his officer for 1 hour one night. And I got very bad reports on him. And I kept telling him, you're going to have to straighten yourself out. He eventually got fired after I retired. So he called me as a witness. And I told him, this is nothing I can say. I'm not going to lie. So I was subpoenaed anyway. And I told the judge, I said, I can't help nobody here. I said, the post office has problems. He has problems. He told me, I know the post office has problems, but we want to talk about him. I said, I can't say a thing for him. There's nothing I can say for him. Because he wasn't right from the beginning. But these are the things that make you go home and hurt at night.
Right.
You know, when you see your own people that just can't confirm.
Yeah. Not doing what it takes.
I had an experience with one of my white employees. Could nobody deal with it. He was just, he had a problem. So one day I called him in and talked with him. I said, what's going on? He said, well, he said, my mama drank, daddy drank, and I just go home and I just don't know what to do. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I can't help your own problem. I said, but when you come to work here, you got a problem, you come to me and let's sit down and talk. Became one of my best workers.
Is that right?
I told my supervisor, I said, we should give him a letter of commendation. He said, for what? I said, because he has changed his life. He's a lot better than he says he's not doing any better. I said, that's not what I'm going to do. I said, I'm going to give it to him myself. I said, because if you don't feel like it, you should award your people for doing a better job. The thing at the post office, you're not doing any more than you should be doing. And I feel if a man comes from one step to another one, you should have come and you should do something for him. And that way you get better results from the people that work for you.
That's right.
But the post office don't feel that way. They feel like, I mean, you don't, your supervisor's constantly getting merit awards at the end of every period. But the people that cause him to get that merit award, he's not doing anything for them. No. And this is one of the reasons that you have a lot of disgruntled people in the postal service. True, you have 10% of the group that's there that cause the problem. These are the people that don't come to work. These are the people that constantly are. This is where you hear the people that shoot the supervisors because they've lost their job. And nobody did it but them.
How many years were you in the postal service?
All told, I had 36 years service. Most of it was in the postal service. And it was getting to the point that I didn't like doing it anymore.
When did you come out?
87, May 87. I had a business that I had been doing ever since that my father passed, and he and I were going to run the business ourselves. We had a California. And after he passed, I just decided to do it myself. And that was the thing that was always thrown at me when I would say, hey, you know, do what you have to do. You don't have to do this. They said, well, you always got something to fall back on. I said, no, I fall back on me. You know, I said, that takes care of itself. And this takes care of itself. So I came out and dealt with the farm, and we dealt with.
Where's your farm?
In Jefferson. And I dealt with the farm, and we raised cattle, vegetables for the market, and sold timber. And after my wife passed, I just decided I didn't want to do it anymore. She passed in '89. But my son, he wasn't interested in it. And I think he had got burnt out. He had been in it ever since he was 3 years old. And I just came out, and now I just try to help where I can.
Right. But what would you say would have been the highlight of your career?
The highlight of my career was the first year that, you mean the postal career?
Right.
The first year that I became supervisor. Excuse me. Just before Christmas, every year, I don't think they do it now, all the supervisors all over Alabama come to Birmingham. And I was introduced at that meeting. That was, I think, was the highlight of my career. There were no black people there. And the meeting was held over here at the Federal Building. And I was introduced to Mr. Hicks.
What year was that?
I was in 1964. Yeah, no, it was 1963.
Why did they introduce you?
I was a new supervisor.
Okay.
And I was introduced as the new supervisor.
As Mr. Hicks.
As Mr. Hicks. And that was the highlight of my career, I think.
We've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything else that you'd like?
There's a lot I could talk about, but I know you're limited.
Well, I'm
There's a lot I could talk about, and it comes to you, and it doesn't come at one time.
Mm-hmm.
But I would like to say, if for the people that would view this, the hard times we had going through to register people to vote, I think we should get a better turnout at voting time each time we vote, because we voted, registered a lot of people to vote. And we registered a lot of people to vote that for some reason was denied the right to vote. I went to Powell. The last year they had poll tax. We had to collect poll tax for Birmingham and mail it to the city of Birmingham. Well, I came from the Powell office and came down to the post office there on the first of the month. Lady had a long line of people there to wait on. So I told her at the time we were to register these, to get money orders and mail this poll tax to the city of Birmingham. But it had to be billed to the federal government. And she told me she couldn't do that. That's another highlight. She told me she couldn't do that. So I went and pulled my credentials out, and I said, I think you can do it. And she proceeded, and she said, y'all gonna have to wait. And she went and she made it out, and she sent it where she go. That's another incident.
Yeah. There was still poll tax after 65?
The poll tax came about, they were still in effect that lasted in 66. That was the ending of it. And we were collecting the last of the poll tax for them, and it had to go to the city of Birmingham. And after that, there were no more poll tax. That should have been about January, February into 64. And because after that, poll tax ceased.
Right.
But we did have to collect them, at that point. And the ones that we collect had to be sent to the city of Birmingham. But that day, it was quite interesting because that had been one of my problem people that I had dealt with over the years. So you kind of feel good when you can, kind of change some things that you know are wrong.
Right.
Right.
Ms. Hicks, I want to thank you for taking time.
I appreciate you asking.
And,
I have been wanting to tell some of this and all of it for a long time.
Yes.
And we haven't touched a whole lot on the situation in federal service in back in the 60s.
Right.
But it was rough. I was even trailed home by the police every morning. I had to get a pass to go to work at night. I worked 11 to 7 shift. I had to get a pass. I was getting tickets every night I went home. I was getting a ticket. I had to get a pass from the postmaster to go home. When I would leave from work in the mornings, the police would get right on my bumper and follow me home.
From work?
From work. And I reported that to the inspectors. That ceased. Black drivers were given tickets for anything. Black carriers were given tickets for jaywalking when white carriers had been doing it for years. It wasn't true, but it was a tradition. If you had mail that go across the street, white carriers have been crossing the street and taking it across the street. But black carriers eventually had to, when you got black carriers, you had black carriers for a long time. But when it got in the 60s and when it got so prominent, you started having problems because the old black carriers didn't rock the boat.
Were there black carriers when you came into the system?
Yeah, black carriers had been in Birmingham for years. Some of them had been in long enough to be retired when I came in. I know Mr. Howell out in Inslee, my wife's uncle, he was a carrier out in Inslee. And Mr. Welch, I think, was a carrier at right there at Holy Family. I think he was a carrier back then. And you had old carriers, but they were not going to rock that boat. They were afraid to because they would lose the jobs.
Right.
But I felt like this, if I lose this one, I get another. So, didn't want to lose it though. And I told you before that my father had a long conversation with him. One of my friends went to him and told him, said, tell that boy to calm down. I said, he's too hard. I told him, I said, Daddy, I said, I'm only doing my job. That's all I can do. He said, but I don't want you to get hurt. I said, I don't think I'll be hurt. And I think he was the one, I reminded him of something. And it's kind of a little joke. We were down on 20th Street and this guy walked up to him. He called my dad. He said, hey, Tom. My dad looked around. He said, how you get down to 18th Street? Dad looked at him. He said, how did you know my name? He said, I don't know. I just figured it. He said, you figure out how to get to 18th Street. I said, now, Daddy, you started that. So we had to laugh about it.
Yeah. So you were a chip off little block.
Yeah. Well, Mama was a little fiery too.
You didn't have a choice then.
No, I didn't have a choice because I knew what I had to do. And I just felt that the experience in Korea was just too, I saw too many people die in Korea, you know? And I figured if this was what we were dying for, what were we going to live for? And war is an experience that you don't know unless you've been in. And I just don't feel a lot of times that people were given justice that went to war. Not that anybody owe you anything, but at least treat me like a man, you know. So that's about the gist that I can give you. It'll come and go.
Yes, well, I certainly appreciate it because it's an interesting story because, see, one of the things that's important, I think, is to have people like yourself to talk about those experiences because if you don't talk about them, we don't get it.
That's true. You had a lot of, you started having black clerks in the post office in 1951.
Okay.
Before that, you didn't have any clerks.
Okay.
And they couldn't sit by white women. As a matter of fact, when I came in service, some of the women didn't even want to sit like that. They would get up. Supervisor would let them sit where they wanted to, which was wrong. And I had a sexual harassment suit filed against me by a black woman.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. It's a long story. But
what year was this?
This was in latter years in the 80s. See, we worked in two different units. I worked in the unit where we broke down the mail and we got it out to different units. And she had to bring her mail to me to be shipped. And every morning we had, hampers sitting here, hampers sitting here, hampers sitting here. And each one of them is designated for West End, one is designated for Inslee, one is designated for Solon. So every day she'd just come and sit it down. I said, look, put it in the hampers designated. You work West End, put it in West End. I had told her this 3 times. Next morning she brought us to it. It's a black woman. So Mr. Hicks, I got a sexual harassment suit against you. That's okay, I'm busy right now, but I'll get to it in a minute. So I said, come in my office and I'll be through in a few minutes. So I went in and I said, what's the suit? And she told me. I said, okay. I said, I'll tell you what I think I will do. I said, I'm gonna file a countersuit because I don't think you know what sexual harassment is. Doing your job and sexual harassment is two different things. So the guy told her, the steward told her, said, let me go back out and talk to you. I said, no, I'm gonna file a suit against her. So he said, let me talk to her. I said, do what you have to. So he came back, he said, she don't know what she's doing. He said, just let me handle it and let me take her. I said, let me ask you a question. I have told you before, find out your problems and analyze them before you bring them to the supervisor because it's taking my time. But the unions were told to keep up as much harassment as they could against management. And of course, you know, being black, they were going to be more. Some of my friends, co-workers, were very good people that were good management material. They were passed over. And some of the people that were selected in their places, it was just a disgrace. When I came into the service, if you paid $500 to the party, you were guaranteed a job if you were white.
If you paid $500?
$500 into your particular party, Democrat or Republican. That's why later years you came out, you found out that politics, there was no politics in the postal service, but it's still there. Because I go to work, if I'm a certain color, I can go and bring my whole family in, but say only supposed to be 3 to a family. I can bring my whole family.
I mean, if you're white, you
right,
can bring your whole family.
And people that have been to school, I'm speaking of black women, black men that have been to school, business school, been to college, you had more people sitting on stools, cases made up with master's degrees among the black race that were clerks than should have been supervisors.
But they could not qualify for the supervisor.
They could qualify. They were looked over.
Yeah.
A lot of them said they didn't want the responsibility. A lot of them were absolutely looked over.
But one of the qualifications would have been having white skin.
That was the main qualification. There have been white women come into the postal service, work on the floor for a week. The next couple of weeks they're upstairs. There were black women that came in there with degrees in secretarial work, office work. They still sticking letters up there now.
So there has been...
And still is. And will be.
Called that white skin privilege.
That's right. But they will tell you it's not true. I had everybody in the group that I was hired in came on the street. And then after 1955, they had started taking the test. Because nobody in the group, and as a matter of fact, they had to take some kind of little test after, you know, they started certifying you, you had to come off the register. But this was a joke, you know. But now if you were a friend of mine and I said, come on, I'll take you down to see my guy, I couldn't do it.
There is a difference.
Yeah, big difference. Yeah. And you look at these things and you got to work, every day. And all of this going through your mind and all of these problems that's going on, you got to keep a level head, you got to do what you got to do. But you know there's a difference there. There are rules for you and there are rules for me. So, hopefully, the future will bring a change. We hope.
Let's keep hoping. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.